The massive Zephyrian battle cruiser drifted through the cold darkness of space like a sleeping giant. Its hull stretched for miles in every direction, covered in thick armor plating that gleamed under the distant stars. Inside the ship's main cargo bay, General Korath stood with his hands clasped behind his back, watching the prisoner exchange with growing disgust. The general was an impressive sight even by Zephyrian standards. He towered nearly 8 feet tall, his reptilian body covered in azure scales that bore the scars of countless battles. Each scale was as hard as steel, and his yellow eyes burned with the intelligence of a seasoned warrior. His uniform bore the marks of his rank, and every alien soldier in the bay gave him a wide berth as he moved through the crowd. Today's exchange was routine business. The Galactic Alliance had captured several human soldiers during recent raids, and the human fleet wanted them back. In return, the humans were releasing captured Zephyrian, Krillian, and Vorthan warriors. It was a fair trade by military standards, though Korath questioned why the humans bothered with such weak specimens. The alien prisoners being returned to their respective fleets looked exactly as warriors should. The Krillian soldiers stood, 7 feet tall with thick, muscular bodies that could crush metal with their bare hands. Their gray skin was tough as leather, and their forearms made them deadly opponents in close combat. The Vorthan troopers were smaller but wore advanced armor that made them nearly indestructible. Each one radiated the confidence of a trained killer. Then there were the human prisoners. Korath shook his massive head as he watched them shuffle forward in their restraints. Most looked reasonably healthy, though they were all much smaller than proper warriors should be. But one human in particular caught his attention, and not in a good way. The creature barely reached 5.5 feet in height, and his build was so thin that Korath wondered if he was suffering from some kind of wasting disease. His dark hair was cut short, and his brown eyes seemed too large for his narrow face. The human wore the same gray prisoner uniform as the others, but it hung loose on his frame like clothing meant for a much larger person. "Commander Velix," Korath called to his aide, a younger Zephyrian with bright green scales. "What is wrong with that one?" Velix followed his general's gaze to the small human and consulted his datapad. "That is Private Danny Martinez, sir. He was captured during the raid on the Centauri supply depot 3 months ago. Medical scans show he is healthy, though obviously weak by any reasonable standard." Korath let out a harsh laugh that echoed through the cargo bay. "Healthy? Look at him, Velix. A strong wind could knock him over. How do the humans expect such pathetic creatures to fight a war?" The general watched as Danny shuffled forward with the other prisoners, his movements slow and careful. The humans' wrists were bound with standard restraints, but even those seemed too heavy for his thin arms. Korath had seen many species during his long military career, and he had never encountered warriors so obviously unsuited for battle. "Perhaps this explains why the humans are losing the war so badly," Velix suggested. "Their soldiers are simply inferior specimens. Natural selection has not been kind to their species." Korath nodded in agreement. The evidence was right in front of them. While the other races had evolved into powerful warriors with natural weapons and armor, humans remained soft and fragile. Their skin was thin, their bones were brittle, and they had no claws or fangs to speak of. Even their senses were poor. Compared to most galactic species, the exchange process continued around them as ships from both fleets moved prisoners back and forth. Korath watched the human transport vessel dock with his cruiser, and he saw the human officers who had come to collect their people. They looked just as weak as their captured soldiers, though they tried to carry themselves with military bearing. "I still do not understand why they keep that one alive," Korath muttered, gesturing toward Danny. "What possible use could such a broken creature serve in their military?" Velix shrugged. "Perhaps they use him for maintenance work or food preparation. Surely they would not send him into actual combat." The general studied Danny more closely as the human approached the exchange point. There was something about the way he moved that seemed odd, though Korath could not quite identify what it was. The human's steps were measured and deliberate. and his eyes were constantly scanning the cargo bay as if he were memorizing every detail. "Look at how he observes everything," Korath said. "Almost like he thinks he is gathering intelligence. How amusing." The two Zephyrians laughed at the idea. What useful information could such a weak creature possibly gather? Even if he somehow managed to escape, which was impossible, what threat could he pose to a ship full of trained warriors? Danny reached the exchange point and stood quietly while the human officers verified his identity. He spoke briefly with one of them, his voice too quiet for the aliens to hear. Korath noticed that the human's hands were steady despite his apparent weakness, and his posture remained straight even after months of captivity. "Their species truly is a mystery," Korath said finally. "How did they ever survive long enough to develop space travel? Any proper predator should have eliminated them millions of years ago." As the exchange concluded and the human prisoners were led away to their transport, Korath made a decision that would change everything. He had been planning to return to his quarters and review tactical reports, but watching these pathetic humans had given him a different idea. His troops needed entertainment, and what better way to boost morale than to demonstrate the superiority of Zephyrian warriors? The small human would serve perfectly as an example of their enemy's weakness. A quick combat demonstration would remind everyone why victory was inevitable. "Commander Velix," he said, his voice carrying the authority of absolute command. "Delay the departure of that human transport. I want to keep one of their prisoners for a special demonstration." Velix looked confused but nodded obediently. "Which one, sir?" Korath smiled, showing rows of sharp teeth. "The broken one. Private Martinez. He will serve as an excellent example of why humanity is destined to lose this war." The news spread through the Zephyrian ship like wildfire. General Korath had decided to stage a combat demonstration, and the weak human prisoner would face one of their own warriors in the main arena. Within an hour, excited aliens filled the corridors as they made their way to the ship's entertainment deck. The arena was a massive circular chamber located in the heart of the battle cruiser. Its walls rose 50 feet high, covered in reinforced metal that could withstand the most powerful weapons. The fighting floor was made of polished stone that had seen countless battles over the years. Bright lights illuminated every corner, ensuring that the audience would miss nothing. General Korath stood in the command booth overlooking the arena floor, his yellow eyes gleaming with anticipation. Around him, his senior officers had gathered to watch what they all expected to be a brief but educational display. The general had changed into his ceremonial armor for the occasion, its deep blue surface decorated with symbols of his many victories. "This demonstration will serve multiple purposes," Korath announced to his officers. "Our troops will see firsthand why humans pose no real threat to our empire. They will understand that these creatures are nothing more than soft, weak beings who somehow stumbled into space travel." Commander Velix nodded eagerly. "The troops have been requesting more entertainment, sir. This will certainly boost morale throughout the fleet." Below them, the arena was filling with hundreds of alien soldiers. Zephyrians, Krillians, and Vorthans took their seats in the viewing sections, their conversations creating a low rumble of excitement. Some were placing bets on how quickly the human would fall, while others debated whether the creature would even attempt to fight back. Lieutenant Thrak made his way onto the arena floor to thunderous applause. He was young for a Zephyrian officer, only 60 years old, but he had already proven himself in several battles against human forces. His scales were a vibrant green color that marked him as a member of the warrior caste, and his body was perfectly proportioned for combat, standing. Nearly 7 feet tall, Thrak moved with the fluid grace of a born predator. His natural armor plating was thick enough to stop most weapons, and his claws could tear through metal like paper. He had trained in combat since childhood, learning every fighting technique known to his people. More importantly, he had faced humans in battle before and knew exactly how weak they truly were. The crowd roared its approval as Thrak raised his arms in salute. He was everything a Zephyrian warrior should be: strong, fast, intelligent, and utterly confident in his abilities. The lieutenant had volunteered for this honor the moment he heard about the demonstration, eager to show his general what he could do. Look at him, Korath said with pride. This is what evolution creates when a species faces real challenges. Every aspect of his body is designed for war. The arena fell silent as guards escorted Danny Martinez onto the fighting floor. The human looked even smaller and more fragile under the bright lights, his thin frame dwarfed by the massive chamber around him. He still wore the same gray prisoner uniform, which hung loose on his narrow shoulders and made him appear almost childlike. A wave of laughter rippled through the crowd as they got their first clear look at the human. Some aliens pointed at his obvious weakness, while others shook their heads in disbelief that such a creature had ever been considered a threat. The size difference between Danny and Thrak was so extreme that many spectators wondered if the fight would last more than a few seconds. General Korath activated the arena's communication system, his voice booming throughout the chamber. Soldiers of the Galactic Alliance, today you will witness the true nature of our enemies. This human represents everything that is weak and pathetic about his species. They have no natural weapons, no armor, and no instinct for combat. The crowd listened intently as their general continued his speech. Lieutenant Thrak will demonstrate why humanity is destined to lose this war. Their soldiers are nothing more than soft creatures who have forgotten the laws of survival. They rely on machines and technology because their bodies are too weak to fight properly. Danny stood quietly in the center of the arena, seemingly unaware of the hundreds of eyes watching him. His breathing was steady and his posture remained straight despite the obvious fear he must be feeling. To the aliens, he looked like a frightened animal waiting for the inevitable end. The rules are simple, Korath announced. This is not a fight to the death, but a demonstration of superior evolution. Lieutenant Thrak will show you how easily a real warrior can defeat these pathetic humans. Let this be a lesson to all who question our eventual victory. Thrak flexed his claws and settled into a combat stance, his muscles rippling beneath his scales. He had fought humans before, and he knew they were slow, weak, and easily frightened. This demonstration would be over in moments, and he would return to his duties with another victory to add to his record. The crowd began chanting Thrak's name as the two opponents faced each other across the arena floor. The lieutenant was a mountain of muscle and natural weapons, while Danny appeared to be nothing more than a fragile human who had given up all hope of survival. General, Korath raised his hand for silence, then brought it down in a sharp gesture. Begin. The demonstration that would change everything was about to start, though none of the aliens realized that their assumptions about human weakness were about to be shattered in the most spectacular way possible. Lieutenant Thrak wasted no time showing his superiority. The moment General Korath gave the signal, he launched himself forward with the speed and power that made Zephyrian warriors feared throughout the galaxy. His claws extended fully as he closed the distance between himself and the human in 3 massive strides. The crowd cheered as Thrak's first strike came down like a hammer. His claws sliced through the air where Danny's head had been just a moment before. The human had stumbled backward, barely avoiding the attack by what appeared to be pure luck. Danny's movements looked clumsy and desperate as he tried to keep distance between himself and the alien warrior. "Look how he runs," one of the officers in the command booth laughed. "He has no fighting instinct at all." Thrak pressed his advantage, launching a series of quick strikes that forced Danny to scramble around the arena floor. Each attack came closer than the last, and the human's breathing grew heavier with each narrow escape. His gray uniform was already torn in several places, where the lieutenant's claws had barely missed their target. General Korath watched with satisfaction as his young officer demonstrated proper combat technique. Thrak was playing with his prey, allowing the human to survive just long enough to showcase the difference between a real warrior and a weak creature. The general made mental notes about how he would use this demonstration in future training sessions. The alien crowd roared its approval as Thrak cornered Danny against the arena wall. The human pressed his back against the metal surface, his eyes wide with what appeared to be terror. He raised his hands in a futile, defensive gesture as the lieutenant prepared to deliver the finishing blow that would end this pathetic display, but something strange happened as Thrak lunged forward with his most powerful attack. Danny moved at the last possible second, not with the clumsy stumbling he had shown before, but with precise timing that carried him exactly where he needed to be. The lieutenant's claws struck the metal wall with tremendous force, sending sparks flying in every direction. The crowd fell silent for a moment, confused by what they had just witnessed. Thrak himself seemed puzzled as he pulled his claws free from the wall. The human should have been pinned with nowhere to go, yet somehow he had escaped again. "Lucky move," Commander Velix muttered, though his voice carried less certainty than before. Thrak shook off his confusion and turned to face Danny again. The human was breathing hard and looked exhausted, but there was something different about his posture now. He no longer pressed himself against the wall like a frightened animal. Instead, he stood in the center of the arena with his feet positioned. In a way that allowed him to move quickly in any direction, the lieutenant attacked again, this time with more careful precision. He had underestimated the human's ability to dodge, but that would not happen again. His claws swept in a wide arc designed to catch Danny no matter which way he tried to escape. Danny ducked under the strike and moved to Thrak's left side. As he did, his hand shot out and struck the alien just below the armpit where his scales were thinner. The touch was brief and seemed harmless, but Thrak felt a strange numbness spread through his arm. The crowd began to murmur as they noticed the change in the fight's rhythm. Danny was no longer simply running away from Thrak's attacks. He was moving with purpose, positioning himself in specific spots around the arena floor. His movements were becoming more fluid and controlled with each passing moment. Thrak pressed forward with renewed aggression, determined to end this embarrassing display. He unleashed a combination of strikes that should have overwhelmed any opponent, but Danny seemed to anticipate each attack before it came. The human slipped between the lieutenant's claws like smoke, always staying just out of reach. As Thrak extended his arm for another strike, Danny stepped inside the attack and delivered a sharp blow to the alien's elbow joint. The lieutenant felt his arm go completely numb, and his claws retracted involuntarily. Pain shot through his nervous system in a way he had never experienced before. The arena fell completely silent as Thrak staggered backward, clutching his useless arm. His confident expression had been replaced by confusion and growing concern. The human had done something to him, but he could not understand what had happened. Danny circled around the alien warrior with movements that no longer looked clumsy or desperate. Every step was calculated, every gesture had meaning. He was studying Thrak like a scientist, examining a specimen, looking for something that only he could see. "What is he doing?" General Korath demanded, his voice carrying the first hint of uncertainty. The answer came as Danny launched his counterattack. He moved with sudden speed that caught everyone by surprise, including Thrak. The human strikes were precise and targeted, hitting specific points on the alien's body that caused immediate and devastating effects. Thrak's left leg buckled as Danny hit a pressure point behind his knee. The lieutenant's remaining good arm went numb as the human struck another nerve cluster near his shoulder. Each attack was small and seemingly harmless, but the cumulative effect was turning the massive alien warrior into a helpless giant. The crowd watched in stunned silence as their champion fell to his knees, his body no longer responding to his commands. Danny stood over him, breathing heavily but clearly victorious. The weak human prisoner had somehow defeated one of their finest warriors using techniques that none of them understood. General Korath gripped the railing of the command booth so hard that his claws left marks in the metal. Everything he thought he knew about humans had just been proven wrong in the most spectacular way possible. The silence in the arena stretched for what felt like hours, though only minutes had passed since Lieutenant Thrak collapsed to his knees. General Korath stared down at the scene below, his mind struggling to process what he had just witnessed. The weak human prisoner stood calmly over one of his best warriors, showing no signs of the fear or desperation that had marked the beginning of the fight. Medical teams rushed onto the arena floor to tend to Thrak, who was slowly regaining feeling in his limbs. The lieutenant's pride was wounded far more than his body. and he could barely look at the human who had defeated him so completely. The crowd of alien soldiers sat in stunned silence, their worldview shattered by a single combat demonstration. "Bring the human to my quarters immediately," Korath commanded, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. "I want to understand what just happened down there." Commander Velix nodded quickly and rushed to carry out the order. The general remained in the command booth for several more minutes, watching as his medical staff helped Thrak to his feet. The young officer would recover fully, but the damage to his reputation and confidence would take much longer to heal. Within the hour, Danny Martinez sat in a chair across from General Korath in the aliens' private quarters. The room was decorated with weapons and battle trophies from countless campaigns, each one representing a victory over some enemy species. The general had changed out of his ceremonial armor and now wore a simple uniform that somehow made him look even more intimidating. "Explain to me what you did down there," Korath said, his yellow eyes fixed on Danny's face. "How did you defeat Lieutenant Thrak when you can barely stand upright?" Danny looked around the room with the same careful attention he had shown in the arena. His movements were still economical and precise, no longer hiding behind the facade of weakness that had fooled everyone for so long. When he spoke, his voice was calm and steady. "I studied your people during my time as a prisoner," Danny said. "I learned how you move, how you think, and most importantly, where your bodies are vulnerable. Lieutenant Thrak is strong and fast, but he fights like someone who has never faced a real challenge." The general's scales bristled with anger. "You dare suggest that Zephyrian warriors are not properly trained? We have conquered dozens of worlds with our combat techniques." "I am not questioning your training," Danny replied. "I am saying that your training assumes your enemies will fight the same way you do. Humans learned long ago that the strongest opponent is not always the one who wins." Korath leaned forward in his chair, his massive frame casting a shadow over the human. "Then explain to me how a creature as weak as you managed to defeat someone like Thrak. What trickery did you use?" Danny was quiet for a moment, considering his words carefully. "It was not trickery, General, it was knowledge. Your people have thick scales and powerful muscles, but you also have nerve clusters and pressure points that can be exploited if you know where to find them. Every advantage can become a weakness if approached correctly." The general's expression changed as he began to understand what the human was telling him. "You studied our anatomy while you were imprisoned? How could you possibly learn such detailed information?" "Human soldiers are trained to observe and adapt," Danny explained. "We study our enemies not just to fight them, but to understand them completely. During my captivity, I watched how your guards moved, how they reacted to pain, and how their bodies were constructed. I memorized the location of every joint, every vulnerable spot, and every weakness." Korath felt a chill run down his spine as the implications became clear. "You mean to tell me that every human soldier possesses this knowledge?" "Not every soldier, but many of us do. We call it adaptive combat training. The idea is simple. No matter how strong or fast your enemy might be, they always have weaknesses that can be exploited. The key is learning to find those weaknesses and use them effectively." The general stood up and began pacing around the room, his mind racing with new possibilities. "This is why your people have been able to resist our forces for so long. We assumed you were simply using superior technology to compensate for your physical limitations." "Technology helps," Danny admitted, "but it is not our greatest advantage. Our greatest advantage is that we never stop learning and adapting. Every battle teaches us something new about our enemies, and we use that knowledge to become more effective." Korath stopped pacing and turned to face the human directly. "What you did to Lieutenant Thrak, could you do the same thing to other species? To Krillians or Vorthans?" "Each species has different vulnerabilities," Danny said. "But yes, human special operations soldiers are trained to identify and exploit weaknesses in any opponent. We study alien physiology the same way your people study weapons and tactics." The general returned to his chair, his expression thoughtful. "You mentioned special operations. Are you saying that you are not a typical human soldier?" Danny allowed himself a small smile. I was part of an elite unit designed specifically to gather intelligence and conduct operations behind enemy lines. My apparent weakness was partly due to my imprisonment, but it also served as perfect camouflage for my true capabilities. And how many soldiers like you do the humans possess? Korath asked, though he was not sure he wanted to hear the answer. Enough, Danny replied simply. We have hundreds of different military specializations, each designed to counter specific threats. What you saw today was just one example of human adaptive capability. General Korath sat back in his chair, his mind reeling from these revelations. Everything he thought he knew about the war, about human capabilities, and about his own people's advantages had been turned upside down by a single conversation. The weak prisoner who had seemed so pathetic was actually a highly trained operative, who had been gathering intelligence the entire time. You have given me much to think about, Korath said finally. This conversation has been most enlightening. Danny nodded respectfully. I hope it has been helpful, General. Understanding your enemy is the first step toward making intelligent decisions about the future. As guards escorted Danny back to his cell, General Korath remained in his quarters, staring at the battle trophies that lined his walls. Each one represented a victory over an enemy he had understood, but now he realized that his greatest enemy was one he had never truly understood at all. General Korath spent the next several hours alone in his quarters, reviewing battle reports and tactical analyses with fresh eyes. The conversation with Danny Martinez had planted seeds of doubt that were now growing into a complete reassessment of everything he thought he knew about the war. Each document he examined revealed patterns that he had previously dismissed or misunderstood. The general called for Commander Velix to join him as he spread tactical maps across his desk. The younger officer entered the room still shaken by what he had witnessed in the arena, his usual confidence replaced by uncertainty and confusion. Sir, the crew is asking questions about what happened today, Velix reported. They want to know how the human defeated Lieutenant Thrax so easily. Some are suggesting that the prisoner used some kind of forbidden weapon or technology. Korath looked up from his maps with tired eyes. There was no weapon, Commander. What we witnessed was pure human combat technique, something we have never bothered to study or understand. Tell me, when you review our past battles with human forces, what patterns do you notice? Velix consulted his datapad and began reciting. Familiar statistics. Human forces typically retreat when faced with superior numbers. They avoid direct confrontation whenever possible and rely heavily on ranged weapons and defensive positions. Their casualty rates are consistently lower than ours, but we assumed this was due to cowardice rather than tactical skill. What if we were wrong? Korath asked. What if their retreats were not acts of cowardice but strategic repositioning? What if they were studying us during every engagement, learning our weaknesses while we assumed they were simply running away? The commander's scales shifted to a paler shade of green as he considered this possibility. You think they have been gathering intelligence about our combat methods this entire time? I think we have been fighting an enemy we never bothered to understand, Korath replied. Look at this battle report from the Kepler system. We claimed victory because we held the field, but the humans accomplished their mission objectives and escaped with minimal losses. We celebrated while they achieved exactly what they wanted. Velix studied the map more carefully, noting details that had seemed unimportant during the original analysis. The human positions were designed to funnel our forces into specific areas. They knew exactly where we would attack and prepared accordingly. Exactly, Korath said. And this pattern repeats throughout our campaign records? We have been fighting according to predictable strategies while they adapted to counter every move we made. We thought we were winning because we counted bodies, instead of measuring actual strategic success. The general activated his communication system and requested access to the ship's intelligence archives. Within minutes, detailed files about human military structure appeared on his screens. What he found there challenged every assumption his people had made about their enemies. Commander, did you know that humans have over 300 different military specializations? Korath asked. Each one is designed to counter specific types of threats and enemy capabilities. They have soldiers trained specifically to fight in zero gravity, others who specialize in urban warfare, and entire units dedicated to psychological operations. Velix leaned over to examine the files, his expression growing more concerned with each revelation. These specializations are incredibly detailed. They have studied every known alien species and developed specific tactics for fighting each one. There are entire training programs dedicated to exploiting Zephyrian combat weaknesses, and we dismiss them as weak because they do not look like traditional warriors, Korath said bitterly. We measured their strength by our own standards instead of trying to understand their actual capabilities. The general pulled up another file that made his blood run cold. It contained detailed analyses of Zephyrian psychology, culture, and military doctrine. Human intelligence services had compiled comprehensive profiles of key alien leaders, including himself. They knew his tactical preferences, his personality traits, and even his personal history. They know us better than we know ourselves, Korath muttered. While we were studying their weapons and ship designs, they were studying our minds and predicting our behavior. Commander Velix discovered another disturbing revelation in the files. Sir, according to this intelligence report, the human prisoner Martinez was not captured randomly. He was specifically assigned to gather information about our ship designs and command structure. His capture was part of a planned operation. The general felt his worldview crumbling completely. You mean he allowed himself to be captured? His entire imprisonment was a mission? It appears so, sir. The report indicates that human special operations frequently use apparent weakness as a tactical advantage. They deliberately appear vulnerable to encourage their enemies to underestimate them. Korath stood up and walked to his window, looking out at the stars with new understanding. How many other human prisoners have we taken who were actually intelligence operatives? How much information have we unknowingly provided to our enemies? The implications were staggering. Every captured human could potentially be a trained spy gathering critical intelligence about alien capabilities. Every apparent defeat might actually be a successful intelligence operation. The war that seemed to be going so well for the Galactic Alliance might actually be proceeding exactly as the humans planned. Commander, I want you to review every human prisoner we have taken in the past year, Korath ordered. Cross-reference their capture circumstances with subsequent human military operations. Look for patterns that might indicate deliberate intelligence gathering. Velix nodded grimly and began working on his datapad. Sir, what are you thinking? Do you believe we have been manipulated this entire time? I believe we have been fighting a war against an enemy we never understood, Korath replied. The humans do not fight like us, think like us, or value the same things we do. Their strength lies not in their bodies but in their minds, and we have been measuring them by completely wrong standards. The general turned back to his desk, where intelligence files continued to reveal the scope of human military sophistication. Every page showed him something new about an enemy he had underestimated, catastrophically. The small, weak creatures he had mocked were actually members of one of the most adaptable and intelligent species in the galaxy. We need to completely reassess our strategic approach, Korath said finally. Everything we think we know about human capabilities is wrong, and continuing with our current tactics will lead to disaster. As the two officers continued their review of human intelligence files, one fact became increasingly clear. The war they thought they were winning was actually a much more complex and dangerous conflict than they had ever imagined. General Korath stood before the massive viewing window in his quarters, watching the stars drift past as his ship continued its patrol route. 3 days had passed since the arena demonstration, and the general had spent every waking hour reviewing intelligence files and battle reports. The weight of his discoveries pressed down on him like a physical burden, changing everything he thought he knew about the war. Commander Velix entered the room carrying another stack of analysis reports. The younger officer looked exhausted. From days of continuous research, his green scales having faded to a dull gray from stress and lack of sleep. The patterns they had discovered in human military operations were more sophisticated and far-reaching than either of them had imagined. "Sir, I have completed the prisoner analysis you requested," Velix reported. "Out of 47 human captives taken in the past year, at least 23 show signs of specialized training beyond standard military preparation. Their capture circumstances align perfectly with subsequent human intelligence operations." Korath nodded grimly. "And our response patterns?" "Predictable in every case, sir. We have been responding to human operations exactly as they expected us to. Our tactical decisions have been so consistent that they appear to be following a script written by human strategists." The general turned away from the window and faced his aide. "Commander, I am going to share something with you that must remain between us until I decide how to proceed. I have been in communication with the human prisoner Martinez for the past 2 days." Velix's expression showed surprise and concern. "Sir, is that wise? He could be attempting to manipulate you further." "Perhaps," Korath admitted, "but I needed to understand the full scope of what we are facing. The conversations have been enlightening in ways I never expected." The general activated his private communication system and requested that Danny Martinez be brought to his quarters under heavy guard. Within minutes, the human arrived, looking remarkably composed for someone who had spent months in captivity. His apparent frailty had been completely abandoned, replaced by the confident bearing of a professional soldier. "General Korath," Danny said respectfully as he entered the room, "I understand you have been reviewing our previous conversations." "Indeed I have," Korath replied. "Your insights have forced me to reconsider many of my assumptions about this war. I find myself in a position I never expected to face." Danny waited patiently as the general gathered his thoughts. The human's calm demeanor was unsettling to the alien officers, who had grown accustomed to prisoners who showed fear or hostility. This human seemed genuinely interested in having a productive conversation. "I've discovered that my people have been fighting a war we do not understand against an enemy we have consistently underestimated," Korath continued. "The question now is what I should do with this knowledge." "That depends on what you hope to achieve," Danny replied. "If your goal is to continue the conflict until one side is completely destroyed, then my insights probably will not help you. But if you are interested in finding a different path forward, then perhaps we can discuss alternatives." "Commander." Velix stepped forward, his voice tight with anger. "You dare suggest that we should negotiate with humans, after everything your species has done to resist our rightful expansion?" Danny turned to face the younger officer without any sign of intimidation. "Commander, your people have been expanding through conquest for centuries. From your perspective, resistance to that expansion seems unreasonable. But from our perspective, we are simply defending our right to exist as an independent species." "The strong have always ruled the weak," Velix replied. "That is the natural order of the universe." "Perhaps," Danny said, "but humans have a different view of strength. We believe that true strength comes from the ability to solve problems through intelligence and cooperation rather than force alone. Your people are certainly powerful warriors, but power without wisdom often leads to unnecessary destruction." General Korath had been listening to this exchange with growing fascination. "What are you proposing, Martinez? Some kind of peace agreement?" "I am proposing that you consider the possibility that both our species might benefit more from cooperation than from continued conflict," Danny replied. "Humans have technologies and capabilities that could be valuable to your people. Similarly, your people have strengths that could complement our own abilities." The general walked to his desk and activated a holographic display showing casualty reports from recent battles. "Our losses have been increasing steadily over the past 6 months. At the time, we attributed this to human desperation, but now I suspect it represents improved human tactics based on their study of our methods." "Your tactical adaptations have been impressive," Danny admitted, "but human adaptability tends to accelerate over time. The longer this war continues, the more effective our responses will become. Eventually, the cost in lives and resources will become unsustainable for both sides." Korath studied the human carefully. You speak with remarkable confidence for someone in your position. What makes you so certain that humans will ultimately prevail? Because we never stop learning, Danny said simply. Every battle teaches us something new about your capabilities and weaknesses. We adapt our strategies based on new information, while your people tend to rely on methods that have worked in the past. In a long-term conflict, adaptability usually defeats raw power. The general made his decision. Commander Velix, I want you to prepare a secure communication channel to the human fleet. I am going to speak directly with their military leadership. Velix looked shocked. Sir, are you certain this is wise? Command Headquarters will not approve of unauthorized negotiations with the enemy. Command Headquarters has been operating under the same flawed assumptions that nearly led to disaster in our arena, Korath replied. Sometimes a field commander must make decisions based on information that higher authority does not possess. Danny nodded approvingly. General, I believe you are making a choice that could save countless lives on both sides. True strength sometimes requires the wisdom to know when not to fight. As the communication preparations began, General Korath realized that his encounter with one small human prisoner had changed not only his understanding of the war, but his entire concept of what it meant to be strong. The arena demonstration had been intended to show alien superiority, but instead it had revealed the power of human intelligence and adaptability. The conversation that followed would determine whether the war continued on its current destructive path or evolved into something that both species could survive. For the first time in months, Korath felt hopeful about the future. Even though he knew the path ahead would be difficult and uncertain,